Over there. Okay. I was like, I can see it there. But
Good evening, everyone. We have Emily Austin here. With that in mind, you will not have to tolerate my presence for very long, but I do have a few quick notes before we get started. My name is John. I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Thank you all for braving the windswept wastes of Winnipeg to be here tonight. We're very pleased to have you all here, both in person and online. Before we begin, of course, I would like to acknowledge that we are here in Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Niniwak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Denanis, and the homeland of the Red River Métis. In addition, of course, beneath our feet, McNally Robinson wrestled the land once occupied by the Métis community, Roostertown. We are gathered here tonight to welcome the patron saint of sad girls with too many feelings, Emily Austin, here to Winnipeg. She is here, of course, to celebrate her new novel, Is This a Cry for Help? And we're so very grateful to Scribner Canada and Simon & Schuster Canada for helping to make this evening a possibility. This event will be hosted by Angela Torgerson, who signs my checks, so I will be very polite while introducing her tonight. She is, of course, the executive manager of McNally Robinson. To give you a sense of how the evening will go, there'll be a brief reading from behind the podium, and then we'll move along to a conversation, which will take place in the chairs to my left. After that, there'll be an opportunity for all of you to ask questions, so we'll allow those to percolate throughout the evening. When it comes time for questions, I'll approach you in a non-threatening way with this microphone, which ensures that everybody watching on the live feed can hear the question as well. And I'll be back at the end to go over signing procedure. Just a few quick notes about our participants. The one thing I will point out, most importantly, is that we're thrilled to have Emily Austin here. We often say that booksellers love a particular author, but in this case, we do have empirical proof. Every season, the Canadian Independent Booksellers Association puts together a list of books, the bookseller list that's distributed, and Is This a Cry for Help was unanimously voted #1 for the winter. So she was also our author of the month for January before we even knew she was coming here. So I hope that displayed a bunch of enthusiasm on our. Your host for the evening, Angela Torgerson, is the executive manager of McNally Robinson Booksellers, Grant Park location, and a voracious reader and avid supporter of Canadian literature. Our special guest this evening, Emily Austin, is the author of We Could Be Rats. Everyone in this room will someday be dead. I've never gotten to say from the podium before. Interested Can't Save Our Space, and the poetry collection, Gay Girl Prayers, which is a fantastic collection. She was born in Ontario and received 2 writing grants from the Canadian Council for the Arts. She studied English literature and library science at Western University. She currently lives in Ottawa in the territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. Please give a very warm welcome to Emily Austin.
thanks so much for coming. Thanks for having me. I've never been to Winnipeg before, so I'm excited to be here. So we're going to start with a reading. So I'm going to read from this book. So for context, this is a book about a lesbian librarian who has just returned to work after having a mental breakdown. And I'm going to read you a part near the beginning, but to set the scene, she, on her first day back to work, a man is watching porn in the public library. And the protocol is that she has to make sure it's not illegal porn, and otherwise she leaves him alone. So that's already happened. That's the scene. So someone new has approached her. Can I ask you a question? A man in an ill-fitting suit is hovering by the reference desk. I minimize the website open on my screen. There's a prominent sign suspended above my head labeled questions, and I'm wearing a sizable pin on my vest that says, ask me anything. I smile. It's important to control your body language when you man the reference desk. People should feel welcomed and comfortable approaching me, even when someone asks a nonsensical or obvious question. I need to present as interested and gracious. I nod. Yes, of course you can. Can I record it? He asks, holding out his phone. Sure. Sometimes people like to record conversations. This is especially true of people with anxiety, attention deficit disorder, as well as some other disabilities. I always say yes. Wonderful, he hits record. I'm a correspondent with Liberty Lately. We're doing a story about your pornography policy. A distraught woman contacted me today, voicing her distress when a local degenerate was spotted watching pornography on the public library computers this morning. She said she spoke to the librarian on duty. Was that you, miss? I nod. It seems I've misread this man. He isn't a patron with ADHD, he's a reporter, though I guess he could be both. Can you please answer verbally for the recording? He taps on his phone. I lean toward his phone. Yes, that was me, and I'm actually a Mrs. Joy and I have been married for 6 months now. Can you explain why you would allow the public library, which is funded by citizens like that woman, to devolve into a godless sex hole? I stifle an urge to laugh. It's important not to laugh at patrons, it's impolite, and it might be off-putting depending on the context. The library is not a godless sex hole. I lean toward the phone. The public library is actually a democratic institution. For democracies to work, citizens need to be able to freely educate themselves. Anyone without home internet or a device can come here to access information. You don't have to pay for books or for subscriptions or even for personalized research. Public libraries are sometimes referred to as the last free space because we're one of the last places that exists in the public domain without the expectation of spending money. I'd be happy to recommend some books about the history of, in what twisted, debauched universe is a publicly bankrolled space where creeps can binge watch porno, a democratic institution. Perhaps you're confusing democracy with fascism. I consider the suggestion and say, no, definitely not. Fascism is a system of government led by a dictator who usually rules by forcefully and often violently suppressing opposition. You're forcefully and violently subjecting innocent women to deviance watching depraved sex acts. I'm tempted to comment that the sex acts weren't really that depraved, but instead I say, respectfully, sir, that's a misrepresentation. Well, of course, it's unpleasant to be in the vicinity of someone engaging with it. People can technically watch porn anywhere. I was just on the bus last week when a man was watching, we pay for the library, interrupts me. We pay the electricity bill. We pay your salary. We're paying for that perv's access to porno. The bus is also subsidized by taxpayers.
Hi, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. Thanks so much. I appreciate all the support. That's so nice of you.
Well, we're all big fans. I've said earlier, it's not often I get staff out on their nights and days off to watch these and cheer you on.
Thanks for the booksellers here. I appreciate you.
So I was going to start by asking you about your writing process, but at first, after hearing you pick a particular selection, I wanted to ask you, did you have that scene in your head when you sat down to sketch out the novel?
I started writing the novel. Well, here I was doing employee orientation at the Ottawa Public Library when I started writing this book, and it was the height of COVID, so it was a Zoom call and my camera was off. And so I was bored. It was employee oriented. Their time was like leave banks and that kind of stuff. But then they started talking about the intellectual freedom policy and what to do if confronted with porn. So because no one could see me, I was like, I'm gonna open a Word document. I was read the story, so that's what I started writing the book.
How much, this is your fourth book in almost as many years, and then fifth, including a poetry collection. How much has your writing process changed since the first novel to now?
A lot of, I'm someone who, when I start to write something, I don't think this is good advice. So if you're a writer and you're about to hear this, you're like, this is what you should do. I will start to write something and then I tell myself, oh, this is the worst thing that's ever been written on earth. And then I edit it. And then I start to write something else. And then I start to feel that way. And then I might open that old document and go, maybe it's not so bad. And then start again. So I have done that with a large number of documents, and every book turns out to be one that I have just over time made myself more comfortable with until it reaches the point where it can be a book. But my writing process has definitely changed. I think there are certain things that I've learned about, like through the editing process. I'm someone who, if you were to look at the Goodreads reviews of my books, you might see people complaining about the lack of plot, for example. That's the kind of thing I try to be a little better at, though I think you probably still see those types of comments. But yeah, there's certain things that you learn through the editing process that I think I try to apply, obviously. So yeah.
I think Goodreads comments should interfere with your writing process.
Well, that's probably true.
Do you write with a certain reader in mind, or do you write more for what you see first?
That's probably the thing that has changed the most, to be honest. So when I was writing Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead, which was my first book, I never imagined anyone reading it, right? I thought, this is my book that I write for myself to entertain myself when I'm bored. And then when it was published, I was really surprised. You know, when you read a book and you're like, oh, there I'm in that book. And that's such a cool feeling. I sort of got that feeling on reverse because I got this influx of messages from people saying that to me, which is I really didn't expect that. I think I thought I was more unique than it turns out I am. So I got a large number of messages like that, and so I went to school to be a librarian, right? And one thing that you learn about in school, you take this, depending on the route you take, you might take a collection development course where you learn about how to develop a collection for a library. And in that course, we had this assignment, we had to pick a certain topic that we were interested in, and we had to assess libraries across Canada for how well their collections represent that. And I picked LGBTQIA+ books. And at the time, so this is over a decade ago, no libraries across Canada had an adequate collection. And the way that you could assess was by like Statistics Canada data. There was like a whole mathematical formula, and no libraries met it. And then the next part of the project was to recommend what books they should acquire to fill the gaps. And you had to recommend books based on like selection criteria. So the way that you assess that a book is good in general is, you know, does it have awards? Is there demand for it? Is there, you know, there's certain like quality assessment criteria. And at that time, it was impossible to meet to fill the gap. So anyways, I say all that to say that I'm very aware, I'm aware that I'm lucky to be publishing books that center lesbian characters right now. And I feel very fortunate by the point in time when I was writing books, because I know there are lots of books that existed before me that are probably better than mine that didn't get into the light. So anyway, so since my first book was published, and because I have that awareness, I think to a certain extent, I think, is this what I want to give readers who are looking for this? I used to write a lot more, I would say darker, like more apathetic and less hopeful. And I do feel like I want to write stories that are more hopeful, partly because of that long rambling answer.
And that's not all that different than how we curate front list purchasing and what books we're going to market or promote. A lot of it is based on our own instincts and what books matter to us, what we want to see out in the community.
Right.
You know, we can have James Patterson buy the cash desk all we want, but then there's some books that we order 1,000 copies of after one read. Just based on how they make us feel. Right. So it's part of the joy of being an independent bookstore. We get to do that.
Choose, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That is one thing that I did notice throughout reading you, is that you do have themes, customers, characters grappling with death and grief and trying to make sense of that. But one thing that always strikes me is how infused with humor your characters are. So is that something that you see from the beginning, or do you fine tune that as you let them develop and become whole for you?
Yeah, well, whenever I start to write a book, my objective is to write a funny book. Like whenever I open the document, I'm like, this is gonna be my funny book. I'm gonna make it funny. And then the characters always end up having like really serious mental health problems, and it becomes very sad. And so I think that's part of what's happening. I think because my objective that I don't completely succeed at is to write a funny book, that sort of is there. I also think, like, as a reader, I love lots of different types of books, but I especially love when a book is funny. But for me, a book is rarely funny unless it also has something to contrast that. Mm-hmm. You know, I think like a standard example of that is if you're at a funeral or you're at like you're in a sad environment. If something funny happens, it's so much funnier. And so I think that's sort of what's happening with my books. But yeah, so I'm kind of starting at it with the hope of it being funny, and then I sabotage myself and make them very sad.
I think like the more I got to know Darcy, and after her breakdown, as she's trying to grapple with the shock and the grief and the guilt surrounding Ben's death, she was just full of grace to me. She had this humor and this ability of looking at things as she's struggling with all of that. But the other thing that I found is that you allowed us to see her, how she saw herself when she's recalling who she was when she was in a relationship with Ben. Was it difficult to write Ben without demonizing him?
Yeah, so the story, a lot of what this book is about it's about two things. So it's sort of about this book banning movement, right? This group of people who've come to the library and are pushing censorship. And then it's also about Darcy looking back on this relationship, this long-term relationship she had with a man before she realized that she was gay. And I wanted so the book is partly about Darcy reflecting on that relationship. And the reason why I wanted those two topics to be in the book is because the story is about, part of why censorship is bad. I can give you a long list, but part of why is because you need to see yourself reflected in books for a number of reasons. And there's lesbians in particular have this experience, because we live in a patriarchy and because we're trained from a very young age to seek out validation from men. It's difficult when you're a little girl or a little person who's raised as a girl to recognize whether you are romantically or sexually attracted to men, or if you just feel like validated by it. It's very difficult to understand that distinction. And so Darcy's story is partly her, she's supposed to sort of show the impact of that. Darcy, in comparison to the characters in my previous books, is significantly more put together. Like, she has friends, she has a successful romantic relationship, she has a job, she's like on paper, she's doing pretty well, but she is still deeply impacted by this. So that's what I was trying to tell with that story. So Ben was, in my mind, this little, like if I were an English teacher and I was trying to probe you, Ben in my mind is supposed to represent two lesbians in general. So he is sort of in a position of power over her. He's a little bit older. He pays for things when she's out, like she's in university age when they're dating. When she's out at the bar at night, he comes to pick her up to walk her home, right? He does things like that because he
kills the spiders.
He kills the spiders, exactly. Even though she's not actually afraid of spiders, right? That's her situation. So Ben is supposed to be sort of a complex person because she feels guilty about him, which I think is an experience a lot of lesbians have when they reflect on relationships that they had in the past. She feels bad. She feels like she negatively impacted his life. But in retrospect, she also realizes, particularly with Ben, that there were issues in that relationship. And though he's not like a super villain, he's not completely a victim. And they both played a role in their breakup.
Yeah. In contrast, I genuinely think that Darcy and Joy might be the nicest couple I've ever read.
Oh,
they're so kind. They take such good care of each other. They're always out telling each other to be safe. Was that contrast important for you to show Darcy's growth that way?
I wanted Darcy to be, for a few reasons. One is that I had never written a lesbian in a happy long-term relationship. I probably should. So that was part of it. But I wanted her relationship. Her wife's name is Joy, so it's pretty heavy-handed with the queer Joy implication. I wanted it to contrast with that relationship to show, and it's not like a perfect relationship. They fight and there's things, but they are aligned to each other and they are genuinely, connected. And there's it's meant to contrast with this relationship where she was inauthentic with Ben and she was not the best version of herself,
Yeah, it's really clear that she's not losing her individuality in that relationship. Neither of them are. But then as a couple, they have that communication and that connection and they're able to maintain it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really lovely.
Thank you.
I really do think it was the nicest couple I've ever read.
That's good things.
How do you feel that both of them had a complicated relationship with their mothers growing up? Was that part of what in your mind brought Darcy and Joy together, that understanding that they share. Darcy, it seems more reluctant until the very end to sort of embrace forgiveness when it comes to her mom, whereas Joy has moved past that a little bit with hers.
Right.
Was that part of the process for you, or?
Yeah, so that's sort of related to what I was rambling about before, about this concept of compulsory heterosexuality, where women are raised in a society to seek out validation from men. I wanted Darcy's mom is the kind of mom who sort of thinks that Darcy is a lesbian to annoy her, right? Like she's like, okay, you try to get attention. She doesn't really get it. Joy's mom was like partly absent because she realized after having children that like she wasn't sure that this is what she wanted in her life. So I wanted both of those characters to also be sort of representative of non-lesbians, but of characters who are also impacted by this. You know, we're pressured to be moms, we're pressured to you know, Darcy's mom, for example, wants Darcy to follow the social script that she thinks you are supposed to follow to be a good and successful woman. And she's disappointed in her for not doing that. And that's also, you know, so the root cause of both of those behaviors and of Darcy's issue is kind of the same. But yeah, so I do see that as being something that would connect them, but would also connect all women and people raised.
Absolutely. So then the other side of the novel surrounds the library, and that's always been a sense of pride and the source of safe space for Darcy. And she leaves and comes back when she's starting to recover, and she's faced with a community that's turned on them a little bit. Did you face that when you were working in libraries? Did you see a lot of that?
I have not on like a person. I haven't personally been targeted the way that Darcy has been targeted. I am when you go to school to be a librarian, you obviously make friends with librarians, right? And then they all disperse across the country, and you maybe kind of still know them. My sister actually is also a librarian. She went to library school after me, and she's older than me though, and that's important that I tell you that. But she works in a public library, and anyway, so I am. Without like revealing too much about people, I know of people who have been like assaulted going to drag queen story times recently. I know of librarians who have been pressured to do certain things. I haven't personally, like on an individual level, faced it. When I was working at the Ottawa Public Library, there was actually more controversy around a book that was, in my view, like on my personal view, a horrible book. So sort of the reverse situation than what we're often seeing in the news. And even in that case, I do think that that book should also be a book that's available, because I think we shouldn't censor anything. But that was the one that was actually kind of related to my job more. But I've never personally had to be face to face with someone the way that Darcy is.
Well, the world has changed a lot in the last while, and what we refer to here at the store often is like the vocal minority and the crisis of morality and pushing that on other people has definitely reared its ugly head. With censorship and book banning and reevaluating like DEI initiatives, was that something you set out to really deeply explore?
I did sort of, partly because of you know, realizing that I'm lucky to write books that center lesbians today. And I did sort of, when I was reflecting on this book, I was like, okay, I'm a librarian. I get to write books about lesbians. Look at what's happening. I think I could probably, maybe this is the story I'm supposed to be writing. So I was thinking a lot about that. I think book banning in particular, like what you said about the small group, that is true. And I think that's an important thing to know, is that it really is like an organized group of people who are influencing things. They intentionally get elected into school boards, and it's a real orchestrated group. And I think knowing that is important, because I think sometimes when you're not aware of everything that's going on behind the scenes, the perception is, especially when we look, I was just in Calgary, for example, so when we're looking at like what's happening in Alberta, the perception sort of seems like this is like a right versus left thing. But the reality of the statistics of it is that people across the political spectrum do not support censorship. And despite the optics of that, that is the actual people, that's true. So, yeah, so I think we can win, we just have to pay attention to what that little group is doing and step in.
Yeah, it's the vocal minority versus the silent majority. So that's where we need the voices to become a little bit louder.
Yes, and to pay attention.
Exactly. Lots more questions, but the one thing that I was fascinated about was the concept of the human library.
Yeah.
Is that something you learned about when you were pursuing your education, or is that something you've participated in?
I've heard about it. I haven't done it myself, and they didn't teach me it in library school, but it's this idea where it's this program where instead of taking out a book, you take out a human. So you have, you kind of like rent a person for a conversation. So for example, you might have someone who, like someone who has had cancer before, and you get to talk to them about that experience, or you talk to someone who's a Buddhist, or you talk to someone who is a lesbian writer or something like that. And you get to have a conversation with them. And part of why I put that in this book is because this book is a lot about like the political divide, the sort of culture war that we have. And the idea that if you really look at another person and actually talk to the other person and see them as another human being and speak to them, you might realize that we are more alike than we are different at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's really cool. We would love to do that here in the classroom someday. We've been talking about that quite a bit, actually. One other person I really enjoyed reading in the library was Sammy's emails. We don't know it's Sammy, of course, at the time, so sorry if anyone hasn't finished the book. One of you, for sure. Did you see those emails as a test? Was she sort of testing trustworthiness there? Is that how they build? Yeah.
Yeah, I was sort of seeing it as, we kind of build relationships with people, and I think libraries are one space where, they're a community space. And if you're someone who is, you're restricted in some ways to finding information. It's sort of like finding a trusted teacher at school. That might be who you confide in a little bit. So yeah, I was trying to demonstrate the importance of there being like a human connection and relationship building in a space of the public library.
Yeah, the humor of the way the questions evolve. The stranger and stranger questions about the birds until she gets to the big questions.
Right, yes.
And then you can see towards the end why she couldn't be asking those questions to an adult in her own life.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, that was really awesome. I was cheering for her.
Yeah.
This was by far the single biggest question booksellers wanted asked.
Okay.
Darcy spends a lot of time trying to reorganize her home library. And that is definitely one of those tasks that you start and go, God, what have I seen?
Why did I do this?
What have I done? Is that something you do often?
I have approached my own personal home library in various ways. Because I'm a librarian, I did try to do, though I could also go on a tangent about issues with the Dewey Decimal System, so I'll spare you from that. But I did try to do that. I was like, okay, I'm gonna organize it that way. But I found in my home library, that wasn't working for me because partly because I'm a writer, so sometimes I have to like film myself in front of a shelf, and I found I would like film myself and be like, I don't really like that book behind me. People are gonna think I like that book. So I was like, I need to have like a shelf of books I like. But anyways, I find the way that I organize my library, long story short, right now, which will probably change, is sort of like read alike. So it would be like if I feel like reading this book, what are other books that I would maybe also feel like reading? So it's totally oriented to my own personal, like anyone else in there would be like, there's no rhyme or reason to how these books are. I'm like, no. Those are all books I read when I'm sad, and those are all books I read when I'm bored or
But definitely not by color.
no, not by color. And definitely not, how some people do, like, you've seen where they flip the spine out or not the reverse, pages out, it's just beige, you can't see the book. That's really bad.
That's where scratches come from, because of her. The other question that the booksellers insisted that I ask you was about your cats.
Okay, yeah.
Were the cats in the book based on your own cats?
My cat is on the cover of this book, which is very exciting. This is my cat Lou. She's a Siamese cat. The back looks even more, she sits like that all the time. When you're getting a book published, at least in my experience, I never know what's like universally true, but in my experience, there comes a point where they send you a couple cover options. It's like, here's 5 options. I saw this one, none of the other ones like had a cat on them, and even if the other ones were way better, I was like, my cat's on the cover, like, that's the one, that's the perfect one, so, yeah. And I like, a fun thing I like to do, every time I'm writing a book, I think in every one of my books, there's some cat named Lou. Like, she was way more prominent in this one because she had a little bit more story. But other times I'm like, oh, there's a cat in the street. What's her name? Lou? Okay, move on. But and I like to do that too. I also like to name name drop my friends in books. So in this book, for example, there are characters named Matthew and Marco. Those are my friends. So when they read it, they saw that. And I like to name characters I don't like after people I don't like. And one fun thing I did in my second book, Interesting Facts About Space, there's this scene where the main character is, though she doesn't want to be here, she's at a gender reveal party. And the party is like mostly populated by nurses and teachers. Both my parents are teachers, and so I'm aware that teachers have really strong feelings about names. So they'll have like a bad kid in their class with a particular name, and they're like, you can never name anyone Jeff or whatever. Anyway, so there's a scene in Interesting Facts About Space where the teachers are talking about what not to name babies, and they say, do not name your baby Ainsley or Mallory, and that's because those were my sister's names.
Okay, that's amazing. So on both sides of the story, forgiveness seems to be sort of the goal where we want Darcy to end up. We want her to forgive herself. We want her to come to a place of understanding at work as well. Do you think forgiveness is an achievable state for her there? Do you think she'll be able to properly with that letter forgive herself?
I think it's complicated, but yeah, I wanted the story to be about her kind of coming to terms with the reality of her situation, in particular about her relationship with Ben. So she feels a lot of guilt about that, and I wanted her to really confront that and to recognize that she wasn't like the villain in Ben's story. She's not responsible for him. She can have compassion for someone without feeling responsible for everything bad that's ever happened to them. So I think based on who she is, like, I'm sure she's not, I don't think anyone has ever like fully resolved of any of their challenges, but I did want this book to sort of be about her reaching a better state in relation to that.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is, what are you working on now?
So whenever I read a book, so my first book, Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead, is about an atheist lesbian woman who stumbles into a job at a Catholic church. And at that time, I was thinking a lot about the Catholic Church and death. So that's what that book's about. And then my second book, Interesting Facts About Space, I was thinking a lot about space. And it's also about having a fear of intimacy. I was thinking about that. Anyways, I won't go through them all, but and this one, libraries and compulsory hypersexuality. So the thing I'm interested in right now is unions, which sounds boring, but if you start reading about unions, you can really go down a rabbit hole. So I also often start writing from a place of thinking about work, because I think that the reality is we live in a capitalist society and we work, So I was a librarian, so as you can see, that's represented here. In my first book, the main character is working at a Catholic church. The second one, the main character is an information architect, which is my day job. So I stole that for myself. But anyways, when I was in high school, I worked as a janitor at a grocery store. So my book is about a janitor at a grocery store, and they're trying to unionize.
When I was preparing for this, I had sort of started a diagram of, yes, this book plus death equals this book plus doing equals. She doesn't need me to tell her. So I will leave the janitors and the unions to you.
Thanks.
What do you like to read for pleasure?
Oh, I like to read a lot of stuff. I just read, what am I reading? Right now I'm reading You'll Love It Here by Natalie Sue. I just started it. She is a very funny writer. She's she's from Calgary. Really good. I just started it. I also recently read a book to blurb, so it's not out yet, but it's called Nymph. And it is sort of like the lesbian Call Me By Your Name. It's set in Italy and it's very vibey. It's very good. It's very immersive. It feels like Call Me by Your Name is a really good call for that. It really feels like that. I've also been reading. I went to Ireland recently, and whenever I go on a trip somewhere, I like to read a book that's from there because you feel like you're really living the experience. So I was reading Carmilla, which is a lesbian vampire book that came out before Dracula. And then I was into that, and then Wuthering Heights came out, and I had read Wuthering Heights, like the movie, and I had read Wuthering Heights when I was like 19, and I went and saw the movie, and I was like, this isn't how I remember. So I'm also reading Wuthering Heights. Yeah.
Wuthering.
Yeah, exactly. With the quotation.
You can't see John behind the curtain, but he is very happy that you were talking about lesbian vampires because he's a vampire guy. There's smiling somewhere back there. I can't thank you enough for this. We will see if the audience has any questions.
Scary to be the first one to ask a question. Oh, sounds great. Should I stand? Yeah, you do whatever you want.
Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for coming to Winnipeg in February.
Thanks for having me.
I'm somebody who's hoping to become a librarian. I applied to library school. Do you have any advice for somebody who's maybe going to study it, hopefully?
I have so much advice. Let me think of how I can boil it down. Do you want to be a public librarian? Yes. Okay. I think you, and maybe you already do, but spend a lot of time in the public library. I think that's important. That would be the first thing I would say. I think a piece of advice that I'll try to say this shortly, but related to a lot of things that are in this book. Libraries are obviously like open community spaces, so they're very impacted by social services not being well funded, for example. And sometimes what happens in public libraries is they try to help that. So they for example employ social workers, or they might have police there, which I would say boo to, of course. But so my general advice would be that doesn't solve the problem. Like if there is a root problem here, the public library doing things like that doesn't actually resolve the issue. And it's important to think of what the scope of what a librarian really should be, which does involve things outside of books, like community development, connecting people to things. But if you try to put on too many hats, you're not going to wear any hat good. I guess this is the gist of what I'm getting at. So that's my attempt at saying that succinctly, but yeah, just try to not lose the core of what your job is. Good luck at library school.
We have a few libraries / former booksellers in the audience right now that could probably give you some advice too, but I won't pick them out.
Hi, I was wondering if you had a favorite scene to write, or if you had like a scene that you really struggled with writing.
That's a good question. So this book is centered in a public library, and something that happens that maybe you, as we were just saying, there's some librarians in the room. I've read books before where I'm like, that's not what the library is like. Like one recently was like the police came to demand employee to see what a patron had taken out, and the library gave them to them. I was like, no, I would never. What library is this? But so anyways, it really mattered to me that I write like realistically what the public library is like. So there's a scene where Darcy goes into the bathroom to cry. And she notices while she's crying in the stall, she's like, why does the bathroom smell like onions and meat? And she leaves the stall and sees that there's a crock pot full of meatballs in the bathroom. And so she's like in the middle of crying and has to leave the bathroom holding a crock pot full of meatballs. And it's like, whose meat is this? And that I felt like I like to write that because I felt like that was a good representation of what it's really like to work in a project like that. Thanks for the question.
Hello. This felt like such a timely read, especially I'm from Southern Manitoba, where the whole library freedom to read conversation has been very strong. How did you hold back in writing a conversation between Darcy and the journalist? I'll give quotation around journalist.
Yeah.
Like how much of you just wanted to kind of like unleash on him. And instead, it's a very thoughtful, very well-spoken conversation between these two people where they ultimately agree to disagree. Was that hard to hold back on? Like, at one point, did you just want to be like, part of my language, like, kind of fuck you?
I do think one thing that I am sort of like, I really do believe in public libraries in a really passionate way. And I do believe that despite I have very strong political opinions, which are probably obvious. But I do think that even me as a deeply political person, if I'm working as a public librarian, I'm being nonpartisan because I respect that that is the role. You know, like I really buy that that is important. And so I want it, and I see that that's a quality of mine that I would also give Darcy, and that I think most public librarians have. It's like a fundamental, you know, it's part of what is important. So I wanted that to be upheld in her character. So, yeah, but it would be, I probably did write a draft where I was like, well, fuck you then, man. But yeah, thanks for the question.
So you talked about having like the great benefit of being able to write what you know, as far as like having all these careers that have been showcased in your book, but you also really delve deep into a lot of topics that I imagine you need so much research for, specifically with like interesting facts about space is like a great example because you have like so many odd facts that you're going through. Do you have a way that you organize research as you go through a certain novel?
That's a fun question. That is actually, so when I'm writing a book, a trick I like to do for myself is because, you know, when you write a book, you start to get like writer's block, right? There's certain points where you're like, I don't know what to write. So whenever I write a book, I try to think of something, and for this one, it was birds, because of the bird facts. I try to think of something where when I don't feel like writing, I can hyperfixate on that topic and just read a lot about birds. Be like, okay, because there's a patron in this book who's continuously asking questions about birds. And with interesting facts about space, I was like, I could learn more about space. That would be a fun thing for me to do. So it's sort of a tricky way for me to occupy myself. I intentionally do that. I am a librarian, so I love to research stuff. I think that's so fun. Earlier drafts of this one, I actually included citations for everything. So like anytime I said something that was said as if it were a fact, even if it was like kind of like not major, I cited it all. We ultimately decided to not include that for various reasons, but originally I had like little footnotes throughout the entire book. I was like, she's a librarian, she would do this, but thanks for the question.
Hi, I have two questions. My first question is, for your novel, We Could Be Rats, where did the idea or the inspiration come from?
That's a good, I do like to draw from certain experiences that I've had, and I like to, I think about what is something that, what's an experience I've had in life that not everyone has, even if it's one that a lot of people have, but not everyone has. I have two older sisters, and I was at the time thinking a lot about how my perspective in life has been impacted by having sisters. We Could Be Rats is heavily about this relationship between two sisters. And I was especially thinking about the dynamic that some sisters have. I don't actually have this because I'm friends with my sisters, but where you're not friends with your sister, but you still would like die for your sister, right? So that's the situation. And I wanted the book to sort of be about that.
My next question is the crock pot. Is that something that you experienced? Were you handle it?
I didn't find a crock pot. No, I did find, you know, atrocious things happen in public libraries, but no, I didn't find anyone cooking meat in the, but I wouldn't have been surprised.
And
I wouldn't have been shocked. Yeah.
Hi, and thank you again for coming. You mentioned your writing process was kind of like start a project, stop project, start a project. How do you decide when something is finished? Because I know a lot of, I mean, like artists in general struggle with like, I could iterate on this forever. So how do you decide sort of?
That's a good question. Yeah. I think, so normally this is my process. Normally I think of like the sort of pitch of what a book's gonna be. So this is a book about a morbidly anxious atheist lesbian woman who stumbles into a job at a Catholic church. And I would write that at the top of my Word document. I would say, okay, that's the planning I've done. And then I would write the first chapter. I would say, what character fits this scenario? And then around that point, I would probably say, this sucks, put it away. And then I would come back to it and read it again and go, well, maybe I can make it okay. And then I would write the next chapter, and I would do that a little bit, and then way before the book is developed, I would write the end. So normally, for my books, they tend to be very character focused, and they tend to have, after I write that first chapter, for example, I would say, okay, what's this person's problem? Like, what's their damage? With Gilda, that was my first book, the character is dealing with like existential dread. So she's dealing with coming to terms with the fact that she and everyone in this room is going to die, right? So I tend to think, what's your problem? And the end is going to be the solution. So that's how I frame it. And then if I weren't publishing books, I would probably never finish them. But because I've been lucky enough to have books published, at a certain point, normally when I still don't like the book, I would send it to my agent and say, feel free to say this is bad. I don't mind. And then she would reply and tell me things I could do to improve it. And then that's always nice. So that's a real privilege to having to getting books published, is having anyone else look at it and tell you how you can make it better. I really, really appreciate that. So normally that gives me the confidence to feel like, okay, she said if I do this checklist of things, it'll be good enough. So I trust her. Thanks for the question.
Thanks so much for coming. This might be a cliche question, but is there a particular author who you have always found, motivating, or that you've tried to emulate through your writing?
That's a fun question. I don't know if I've, here's a funny answer to that question. The books that I find most motivating are bad books. If I read a book, because if I really am hating myself, if I read a book and I'm like, this book sucks, I'm like, perfect, I can write a book. So that's the most motivating for me. Reading like a really good book is not motivating. But I'll still say some writers that I really like. I'm a big fan of Zoe Whittall, who's a Canadian queer writer. She's very prolific. She's got lots you could read. A recent one was The Fake. That was about a woman who was pretending she had cancer. And what else? I'm a fan of Casey Blett, who's also a Canadian writer. She writes stories that center trans women.
She used to work here.
Oh, cool.
We know Casey very, very well.
Casey.
She's a good friend of ours.
Cool. I met Casey once, and I tried not to act starstruck, so that was fun. She's really nice. Who else? Those are two that I like Carmen Maria Machado. I like who else? Sally Rooney. Brandon Taylor is a good writer. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Hi, I always like to ask authors, as not for myself, what is the genre that you would dabble in if you didn't have this focus, or if you do plan on going into a different genre?
Oh, that's fun. That I would like to dabble in. I sort of did that with poetry as one, and I do tend to like, I know it's not necessarily a genre, but when I'm writing a book, I like to write poetry at the same time because I find it helps me use a different part of my brain that lets me, it's sort of like a good writing exercise. It might be because as a teenager, that was when I was like most reading. And I had been like, I had learning disabilities. So when I was a kid, I didn't learn to read till really late, and I didn't identify as being a reader. And I thought of myself as really bad in English. But then once I would start to get into high school, I read a lot, and it was like, I didn't have like a computer. We didn't have I was like forced to read also. So I was just in my room reading a ton all the time. So that's my long way of saying maybe YA, but I don't know if I could. It might just be because I feel nostalgic for the big pile of books that I read as a teenager. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Okay, I have two questions. My first question is, how many books do you have in your personal library? And the second part is, have you ever thought about your books becoming movies or writing screenplays?
Those are fun questions. So, I'm so bad at math and being able to tell anything. I have 2 Billy IKEA bookcases with the extenders. No, I have 4, and they're pretty full. So I'm not sure what that would be. I also have so many of my own books, which shouldn't count, but they always send me, and I should tell them to send less. I have a full bookcase in the back of my house that looks like I have a shrine to myself. And anytime someone comes over, I'm like, please help yourself. And anytime I find out like a friend bought a book, I know they're being like supportive, but I'm like, come over to my house. Regarding movies, an interesting thing that happens when you get a book published. I don't know if this always happens, or I think it does that from time to time. Not always, but it happens commonly. You get phone calls with people who want to turn your books into movies and stuff. I have had several of those phone calls, but it's a very complicated industry. And I don't know what I'm allowed to say about it. There was one, it was my first book, everyone in this room was optioned once. But it was during like the height of COVID and the writer's strike or something, but it got all the way to the point where there was a script. It was a good script, I liked it, but it didn't come to be. I should think about that more though, because your publisher or your agent or whatever will say, this person wants to have a call with you. And sometimes it's kind of like a celebrity. And they're like, okay, they want to have a call with you about your book turning into a movie, but you know it's probably not really gonna happen, even if you have the call. And every time I have those calls, I feel like I have no idea, like I've never seen a movie before in my life. And they're like, what do you want your book to be like? I'm like, I don't know, whatever you want. I feel so unprepared, so I should think about it more. Thanks for the question. Thanks for the reminder that I should. Yeah.
We do have time for another question, if anyone has a final one to close us out. We can do, I can do that.
Hi, I was just gonna ask, what inspires you, or was there some person who inspired you to be a writer?
That's a fun, so like I was saying, when I was a kid, I had a learning disability. And do you do literacy testing in this province? Do you have to do okay, so we did that in Ontario, and in grade 3 could barely read. So that's how I know I really couldn't learn how to read till later. And I had it in my head, so I've learned I'm dyslexic, which is probably obvious if anyone was paying attention, but I had a learning disability, and by the time I got to high school, I thought of English as like my worst subject. I thought I was better at math, and I can't even tell you how many books I have in my life. But in grade 9, I was in do you have applied and academic? Okay, we're not all that different, are we? I was in applied English in grade 9. And so I was thinking, I'll go to college, I probably won't go to university. And one of my first assignments in high school English was to write a short story. So I wrote one, and I genuinely thought it was so bad. Like I was like, okay, doing the assignment, hopefully I pass English this year. I'm bad at it. And my grade 9 English teacher was so nice, and she gave it was a 4+ at the time, so it was an A+, and she entered it into a contest. And it won the contest for all of it was the London District Catholic School Board, and then it won for all of Ontario. And I was so genuinely shocked by that, because I really thought I was so bad at writing. So that English teacher was so encouraging to me, and then she moved me from applied English to academic English. And it was probably her. This is my long-winded way of saying that. My grade 9 English teacher was a great teacher.
Now we have our final question before we turn things over to closing comments.
Hi, I discovered your work last year, so I've read all of your 4 novels and really enjoyed them, and particularly I really enjoyed the titles that you've chosen for them, and I've actually got into trouble for reading. Well, this is TMI, but I'm sure you wouldn't mind. But for example, for the book Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead. I was actually reading that last year while I was getting chemotherapy and cancer care. So I forgot I was reading that book. That's too funny. So I would cover it. I was just like, I really want this. It took hours of my week. And one time I was in this room because I was like, oh, I just need like a private space, and then this nurse came to me and she's like, oh, what are you reading? I'm like, oh, and then she saw it, and I was just so embarrassed. But anyway, how do you come up with such good titles? I was like hooked every
Oh.
time, and every time I read them, I was just like, oh, that's why you came up with those titles.
Well, thanks for that story. That's really sweet. I'm gonna remember that. When I write a book, generally what I do is I'm very open to, like I was saying, I love having like an editor or someone in there with me. And normally I'm writing a lot, so I have this experience where I have like the draft thing I'm working on, and I'm in my head thinking this sucks, this is probably so bad. And then I have another thing that I'm working on where editors are in it, and I think, oh, thank God, these people are in here with me. So whenever I write a book, I normally would write several title options, and I would say, what do you all think? Which one do you like best? So with everyone in this room will someday be dead, I think my agent like said that was the best one. But yeah, and that tends to be the experience. The only one was We Could Be Rats. I liked that title personally, so it was the only one I put in, and no one ever said I had to change it. So I was like, nice. So thanks for that.
And now if you'd like to offer any closing comments, you both are welcome.
Just wanted to thank you for coming. We were all thrilled to have you here. It was a great conversation. We had great questions from the audience. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we will be moving along to the signing portion of the evening right now. So in just a moment, we'll be relocating Emily from that chair to a slightly shorter one. There'll be a moment of chaos while everybody attempts to line up just immediately down this pathway here. Some people will wander out, some people will be there. If the line looks a little too intimidating, feel free to just sit down and hang out. There's no rush. And also please do feel free to come up and get a copy of any of the books signed before you pay for them. We just ask that you please do visit the cash desk before you physically leave the store. We're so grateful to Scribner Canada, Simon & Schuster Canada for helping to put this evening on, to all at SIBA for moving this book into the top spot, and as Angela mentioned, to all of you fine folks for your attention, for your comments, and for spending this evening with us. It's been wonderful to have you all here. Please join me in giving one more enormously round round of applause to Angela Torgerson and Nora McInerny. Have a good night.